a film that faced bans across multiple countries. Based on a shocking true story, this film takes viewers on a harrowing journey. A cruise ship carrying 121 passengers mysteriously vanishes without a trace. Decades later, it's discovered drifting endlessly in the skies. Within the ship's confined space, the stark division between the upper and lower classes becomes painfully clear. Scarcity of food turns the voyage into a nightmare, where survival gives way to chaos and brutality. The film masterfully unveils the darkest corners of human nature. The story begins with the launch of the Like Subscribe, a luxury cruise liner setting sail for a week-long journey. Its 121 passengers come from all walks of life: honeymooning couples, aspiring politicians, notorious criminals, and even a famous local actress. Among them is a quiet old man, whose presence seems out of place. Gangster Boss, the resident bully, exerts his dominance over other passengers but humbly panders to a father and son duo of politicians staying in the ship's opulent suite. When a group of women glimpses the grandeur of the suite from a window, jealousy takes hold. They demand equal treatment, confronting the crew in a heated argument. Things escalate when Gangster Boss and his lackeys intervene, sparking a confrontation. At that moment, Eve, the protagonist, and her husband arrive. Eve's husband, a staunch advocate for fairness, steps in to defend the women but is quickly subdued by Gangster Boss's henchmen. The incident finally calms down under the intervention of the politician. Eve swiftly pulled her husband away from the scene. The ship sets sail, heading into the vast ocean as passengers brim with excitement for the journey ahead. Nearby, Eve noticed an old man quietly collecting soil. Curious, she approaches him with questions, but the old man simply smiles and continues his task without a word. At dinner, the stark divide becomes clear. The politician, his son, and the captain feast on lobster and abalone paired with fine wine, while the rest of the passengers are served meager, bland meals on the deck. Seeing this, Gangster Boss seizes the opportunity to cozy up to the politician, expressing his willingness to be an ally. Recognizing potential future utility in such loyalty, the politician pours him a glass of wine, and the two dine together. The blatant inequality doesn't sit well with Eve's husband. Furious, he confronts the captain, demanding to know why they're being fed scraps while others enjoy luxury. Before he can finish his complaint, Gangster Boss grabs him by the collar, warning him to stay out of matters that don't concern him. Sensing unrest among the passengers, the politician steps in to protect his image. He stated that all the arrangements were made by the ship's captain and promised to move to a standard cabin that night, eating the same food as everyone else. Later, Gangster Boss follows the politician to his suite. Understanding his unspoken intentions, Gangster Boss assures him, "Leave it to me." Gangster Boss then confronts Eve's husband, threatening him to stay out of trouble or risk being thrown overboard. As night falls, the ship transforms. Gamblers' loud voices echo through the corridors, while men revel in drinks and debauchery. The darker side of human greed and desire begins to surface. Amid the chaos, Eve and her husband wander the cruise ship, cherishing their quiet time together. But unbeknownst to them, the politician and Gangster Boss are watching their every move from the shadows. Noticing the politician's interest in Eve, Gangster Boss slyly asks, "You like her, don't you?" The politician hesitates, murmuring, "Her boyfriend wouldn't allow it." Gangster Boss smirks, instantly understanding. "Don't worry," he says, "just wait in your room, I'll take care of it." That night, strangers forced their way into Eve and her husband's cabin. In the chaos, Eve was assaulted, and her husband was brutally killed by Gangster Boss, his body discarded into the sea. Hearing Eve's cries, the politician's son intervened and initially managed to rescue her. Believing she had escaped the nightmare, Eve fled the scene only to be cornered by Gangster Boss, who assaulted her again. With the politician backing him, Gangster Boss and his henchmen grew bolder, wreaking havoc on the ship. They began to loot, terrorize, and take what they pleased from the passengers, knowing full well that, with the politician's influence, any evidence of their crimes could be buried forever. Later, an unconscious Eve was taken to the politician's suite by Gangster Boss. What happened there was unspeakable, but a silent observer, the old man, saw everything unfold from a distance. When the politician's son returned, he was stopped by Gangster Boss at the door. Moments later, his father emerged from the room, looking smug and satisfied. Without a word, he walked away, leaving his son behind. Gangster Boss shoved the politician's son into the room, where Eve lay vulnerable and defenseless. The son hesitated, but in the end, he succumbed to temptation. In the dead of night, Eve, battered and broken, regained consciousness. With unsteady steps, she left the room, stumbling out onto the deck in search of her husband. When she learned he had been killed, her last shred of hope was shattered. Seeing her husband's blood-stained shoe left behind, she climbed onto the railing, ready to end her pain by plunging into the ocean. At that moment, the silent old man appeared and pulled her back to safety. Everything that happened on the ship was witnessed by the old man. The seemingly calm night became a living nightmare for Eve, a young woman in the prime of her life, assaulted by multiple attackers and losing her husband to a brutal murder. Her world turned to darkness in just one night. It was as if the heavens themselves were enraged by the atrocities. As the passengers drifted into sleep, unaware, the ship began to rise silently into the sky. When Eve woke again, the scene before her shattered any thoughts of ending her life. The cruise ship, which should have been sailing the ocean, was now floating among the clouds, suspended high above the world. Panic spread quickly as others awoke. Passengers rushed to the railings, staring in disbelief at the endless sea of clouds and boundless sky, a sight both breathtaking and terrifying. The ship's captain was equally stunned. His radar showed no signs of any abnormalities. Grabbing the intercom, he attempted to calm the passengers, assuring them the situation would be resolved soon. But little did they know, their nightmare was only beginning. Eve turned to see the mysterious old man who had saved her. Driven by curiosity and a strange sense of trust, she followed him to his room. Inside, she found a peculiar sight: two small chicks hatching from eggs, alongside rows of sprouting plants carefully nurtured by the old man.
どうして私を止めたんですか? どうして死ぬのを止めたんですか?
But he remained silent, as if he already knew what lay ahead. Meanwhile, chaos erupted among the passengers. Armed with sticks and makeshift weapons, they stormed the ship's storage area, fighting desperately for food. With supplies limited to just 6 days, survival instincts kicked in, and the struggle over provisions grew more violent by the moment. At this point, the politician put on a facade of compassion, claiming he would fairly distribute the food if everyone handed over control of the supplies to him. But the ship's captain immediately objected, asserting that managing the ship's provisions was his rightful responsibility. The passengers voiced their distrust of the politician and began to move toward him in defiance. Suddenly, Gangster Boss pulled out a gun. The sight of the weapon silenced the crowd instantly, freezing everyone in place. No one dared take another step forward. The politician seized the moment to calm the passengers, dispersing them with reassurances. However, the captain's dissatisfaction with the politician's control was evident. It wasn't long before Gangster Boss pressed his gun against the captain's temple, forcing him to submit. The ship's captain reluctantly complied. The politician then instructed Gangster Boss and his men to don military-style uniforms from the ship's storage. With their newfound authority and firearms, they quickly took control of the food supplies. The divide between the upper and lower classes on the ship deepened. Those with weapons became the rulers, while the crew and passengers were reduced to mere peasants. They were given only a single rice ball a day to survive. After several days of deprivation, tensions reached a boiling point. A passenger, unable to endure the hunger any longer, confronted the politician, but instead of finding a solution, they stumbled upon a lavish feast of meat and seafood being enjoyed by the politician and his enforcers. Outraged, the passengers demanded answers. The politician, ever the skilled manipulator, responded with feigned concern. "We may be stuck here for a long time. As leaders, we must keep ourselves strong to ensure we can guide everyone to safety." With this cunning performance, he managed to quell the growing anger, if only temporarily. Meanwhile, Eve observed the old man scavenging through the ship's trash, beginning to understand his quiet efforts. He appeared to be preparing for the future, cultivating plants and nurturing resources. However, Eve couldn't help but worry at this rate. The food he was growing would never be enough to sustain everyone. Still, the old man remained unshaken. It was as though he had foreseen all of this. Regardless of the chaos outside, he continued his daily routine, methodically planting and tending to his small crops with calm determination. A few days later, famine on the ship spiraled out of control. Desperate to survive, some starving passengers risked everything. They stormed the food storage, willing to endure savage beatings from Gangster Boss and his men just to fill their stomachs. The politician began to realize that hunger would soon lead to an uprising, one that could cost him his own life. To protect himself, Gangster Boss handed the politician a gun for self-defense. The next day, the politician dined leisurely on the deck, casually biting into a drumstick. Without a care, he tossed it to the ground, as if feeding stray dogs. Starving passengers, their dignity long forgotten, scrambled like ravenous animals to grab even the smallest scrap. Even Gangster Boss's men, hardened as they were, couldn't help but feel unsettled by the spectacle. Hunger was eroding humanity, exposing its darkest depths. That night, one of Gangster Boss's lackeys saw an opportunity to make money. Greedy for profit, he secretly sold food at exorbitant prices to a wealthy young passenger, but the shady deal didn't go unnoticed. A group of young tourists spotted the transaction, and chaos erupted as they tried to seize the food for themselves. Soon, other starving passengers swarmed in, creating a full-blown riot. The commotion quickly drew the attention of the politician, Gangster Boss, and his man. When the lackey's secret was exposed, Gangster Boss publicly punished him in front of everyone, beating him savagely to show loyalty to the politician. But the politician wasn't satisfied. He disregarded Gangster Boss's pride, publicly humiliating him in front of everyone. The lackey's anger was palpable as he glared at the politician. He looked ready to defend his boss's honor, but before he could act, the politician raised his gun and aimed it at the lackey's head. The tense moment ended only when Gangster Boss intervened, calming the politician and convincing him to stand down. Back in their quarters, the politician poured a drink for Gangster Boss, apologizing personally for his earlier behavior. Not long after, Eve discovered she was pregnant. Instead of bringing her hope, this new life deepened her despair. She didn't know who the father was, nor did she want to bring the child into the world. The thought of ending her life surfaced once more. To stop her from harming herself, the old man tied her hands gently and placed a tender sprout he had grown in front of her, silently reminding her that the life inside her was a symbol of hope. Gradually, Eve's emotions settled, and she abandoned the idea of suicide. She promised the old man she would keep going and bring the child into the world. On this ship, where food was scarce, morality and dignity had lost all meaning. The cruise liner, which was meant to sail the ocean, now floated aimlessly in an unknown sky. The remaining food was tightly controlled by the politician and Gangster Boss, while the ordinary passengers struggled to survive on a single rice ball a day. The news left the passengers utterly devastated, but despair quickly turned to chaos as another riot erupted. Desperate for sustenance, they stormed the storage area, frantically grabbing whatever they could. The enforcers under Gangster Boss were overwhelmed and could no longer maintain control. At that moment, the politician arrived. Seeing the escalating chaos, he dropped his pretense of compassion. Pulling out a handgun, he fired a warning shot, declaring, "This is what happens to anyone who dares approach the food." One by one, they dropped the food they had taken and scattered in fear, retreating from the scene. The captain, seeing the dire state of affairs, decided he and the crew could no longer stand idly by. While searching the ship, the crew discovered a crate of grenades. They secretly devised a plan to strike back when the time was right. Meanwhile, the old man carried a corpse back to his room, gesturing for Eve to leave. He closed the door behind her. Inside, he pulled out a kitchen knife and, with a blank expression, began working on the body. From the hallway, Eve glanced through the window and let out a horrified scream, frozen in shock. But the old man remained focused. Ignoring her reaction, he methodically dried the bones with a blowtorch, ground them into powder using a shredder, and mixed the powder with soil to plant fruit saplings. It was then that he finally understood the origin of the mysterious soil on the ship. At the same time, the captain stormed into the politician's room, determined to put an end to him and Gangster Boss. Armed with a grenade, the captain threw it into the room and quickly shut the door. But the politician, in a last-ditch move, hurled the grenade into a ventilation shaft, narrowly avoiding disaster. Outside, the ship's captain heard the explosion and assumed the worst was over. As he opened the door to finish the job, he was met with the politician pointing a gun at his head. Under duress, the captain revealed the location of the rest of the grenades. Now in possession of the explosives, the politician conceived a chilling plan. He decided to use the grenades to eliminate the excess passengers. Gangster Boss's lackeys, meanwhile, had their own secret agenda. They hid 3 women they were fond of in a small room, warning them to stay hidden no matter what. But as the lackeys left to move supplies, 2 of the women disobeyed and ventured out. What followed was a brutal and merciless slaughter that marked the beginning of a new nightmare. The politician used the ship's broadcast system to announce a supposed celebration, claiming food would be distributed. The once weary and defeated passengers immediately felt a glimmer of hope and rushed toward the storage area. Eve, too, was about to stand up, but the old man quickly stopped her. Meanwhile, the captain learned that the food had already been moved elsewhere. When the passengers arrived at the storage room, they were met with empty shelves. Realizing they had been deceived, panic and despair set in, but by then, it was too late. All escape routes had been sealed by Gangster Boss and his men. The politician coldly tossed grenades into the crowded passageways, leaving the people inside with no way out. Like lambs to the slaughter, a deafening explosion followed, and silence fell over the corridors. For a brief moment, a flicker of doubt seemed to cross Gangster Boss's eyes, but the politician, unfazed, ordered his men to hunt down anyone still alive, leaving no survivors. Weak from starvation, the remaining passengers could barely run, let alone fight back. The enforcers showed no mercy, slaughtering indiscriminately wherever they went. The enforcers left only carnage and devastation in their wake. The politician soon realized that the captain and his crew were nowhere to be found. He immediately ordered Gangster Boss to track them down, but for the first time, Gangster Boss hesitated, refusing the order. The politician responded by pressing his gun against Gangster Boss's head, leaving him no choice but to obey. The politician then heard a sound coming from one of the rooms. Investigating, he found a young couple hiding. Casually, he tossed a banana into the room. The couple, who should have been united in love, began fighting over the food. Without hesitation, the politician shot him dead. The woman, in shock, called out to her fallen boyfriend, but as hunger overtook her, she grabbed the banana and began to eat it. Before she could finish, the politician killed her as well. His humanity completely eroded. Gangster Boss, unable to stay silent any longer, lashed out, calling the politician insane, but the politician ignored him entirely. The two later went to check on the relocated food supplies, only to discover the captain had reached it first. The ship's captain poured gasoline over the supplies, preparing to set everything ablaze. The politician wasted no time, shooting the captain before he could act. But as the captain fell, the fire spread, engulfing the last of the food stores in roaring flames. The ship had become a living hell, littered with corpses and suffused with the stench of death. The old man walked through the blood-soaked corridors without a hint of surprise, as if he had anticipated it all. Calmly, he picked up his knife and began working on the bodies with clinical precision. He handed the knife to Eve. Trembling, she took it and reluctantly began cutting, one deliberate stroke at a time. Though fear gripped her heart, the bleak reality of her situation forced her to harden herself. The only way to see hope was to gather more soil. Once the soil was ready, the old man planted saplings in it. On the deck, he scattered seeds over the bodies and covered them with earth, repeating the process methodically, as if tending to a farm. When he was finished, the old man handed seeds and soil to Eve, instructing her silently to continue his work in the same way. By this time, only a handful of survivors remained on the ship. The women hidden by Gangster Boss's lackeys had narrowly escaped death, but with no food left, desperation began to cloud their minds. Hunger soon turned to thoughts of cannibalism. Gangster Boss turned his gaze toward Eve, but the politician's son intervened to protect her. Enraged, Gangster Boss raised a knife to attack the son, but the politician himself appeared with a gun. Furious, Gangster Boss wrested the gun away, loaded it with fresh bullets, and shot the politician dead without hesitation. The politician's son grabbed Eve and fled, desperate to escape. Unable to find them, Gangster Boss returned to his quarters and discovered a lone woman. He pointed the gun at her and asked coldly, "Do you want to be my companion or face death?" The terrified woman chose the former, quickly discarding her defenses. But while Gangster Boss was distracted, she attacked, biting his ear. Furious, he stabbed her with a knife, ending her resistance. Determined, Gangster Boss eventually tracked down Eve. The politician's son tried to stop him but was no match. At a critical moment, Eve grabbed Gangster Boss's gun and fired, killing him on the spot. Desperation and hunger consumed them both. After eating, the politician's son turned his lustful gaze toward Eve, ignoring the fact that she was pregnant. He took her by force. Afterward, they sat in silence, clinging to the hope of survival. For Eve, the child in her womb became her only beacon of hope. But survival on the ship had taken its toll. But the limited supply didn't last long. Weeks passed, and they ran out of meat. Starving, the politician's son set his sights on the old man's chickens. He confronted the old man, demanding the chickens, but the old man, as if he had foreseen this, offered a piece of meat instead, slipping it through the door. Eve took the bloody offering, her heart sinking as she realized its likely origin. The old man remained silent, offering only a faint, knowing smile. A few days later, they woke to find the old man gone. In his quarters, they found a large bowl of meat and bloody footprints leading away. The meat kept them alive for a time, but eventually, it too was consumed. Desperation reached new heights. The politician's son turned his hunger toward the last remaining chicken. Eve pleaded with him, reminding him that the chicken was meant for her recovery after childbirth. But the son, now devoid of humanity, was unmoved. In a final act of self-sacrifice, Eve cut a piece of her own flesh to feed him, hoping to save the chicken, yet even this wasn't enough to satisfy him. "I'm eating the chicken today," he declared. Faced with this crisis, Eve knew she had to make a choice to protect the one last shred of hope she had left. Years later, the ship was lush with greenery, and the old hen roamed freely alongside a young boy. Eve and her son had managed to survive on the ship, enjoying a rare period of peace and happiness as mother and child. But that peace shattered the day her son discovered a handgun loaded with bullets inside the ship. In the blink of an eye, over a decade had passed, and her son had grown into a man. They had an abundance of food, more than they could ever consume. Yet Eve remained somber, a cloud of melancholy hanging over her. Her son now carried the handgun, a haunting reminder of someone from the past. To make matters worse, his careless habits, wiping his dirty hands on her skirt after every meal, signaled something far more troubling. It was as if the same cycle was beginning anew, a never-ending test of human nature. And so, the story of survival and moral struggle continues. Stay tuned for the next chapter,